On December 1st, 2022, the Mendoza criminal court stood waiting, holding its breath. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, and the surrounding area was filled with people waiting for the verdict. On the dock sat a woman aged 32, dressed in a black dress, with white beads around her neck. Her face expressed not a single emotion, and her eyes burned with only equanimity and restraint. She was preparing to hear the judgment that would determine her fate and leave a mark on history. Everyone in the room had known this woman for many years, but now they were faced with a mystery that was difficult for them to understand. Outside the courtroom doors, the approaching footsteps of the judge could be heard, like the pounding of a heart, echoing in the silence and felt in every corner of the place. Everyone knew that what was at stake today was not only the fate of the woman in the dock, but also the truth that had remained in the shadows for so long. There was a whole story behind this woman, the events of which were as mysterious as she was. The truth of this real crime is hidden in the details, and the trial becomes a real challenge for all involved. Manato is a small town hidden among the mountains and valleys of the Argentine province of Mendoza. This is the place where nature reveals its most beautiful colors. In autumn, the streets are sprinkled with golden leaves, and the mountain peaks are painted in shades of orange and red. The residents of Manato know each other well, and everyone can tell the biography of their neighbors. Here, people share joys and sorrows, support each other in difficult moments, and celebrate important events together. In this secluded place, among the mountains and valleys, Rolando Aquino and Carjen Oviedo began a romance that would later shake Manato and all of Argentina. When the streets of the city, surrounded by colors of autumn gold, as if frozen in anticipation of something long awaited, the fates of the two young people of this story intertwined. Rolando Aquino, a man with a magnetism capable of attracting the attention of others, could not help but notice the exciting gaze of Carjen Oviedo. She was a woman with fire in her eyes, a passion for life, and an energy that instantly won his heart. The young people were very similar in their interests and dreams, and the determination and entrepreneurial thirst of both inspired them. This meeting was an accident that gave them a chance for true happiness. Finally, they found in this relationship what they had been looking for in others for so long. So in 2016, the lovers started living together and opened their own business, a warehouse, which was located in the house where they lived. Carjen has always had a special eye for detail, and she lovingly created a sign on one of the windows for customer service. Next to it were lists of items for sale. It was their little corner that they were rightfully proud of. The people of Manato watched this happy and determined couple with interest and respect. Everyone wondered who these young people were and how they managed to accomplish so much. Many people knew Carjen from childhood, but Rolando remained a mystery. No one knew anything about his past, except that he came from Bolivia. Rolando not only ran the business with Carjen, but also worked at the fair in Guimalin, where wholesale fruit sales were held. Looking at this couple, it seemed like they had found their little paradise on Earth. But sometimes, even the strongest and most sincere relationships can face a test. One day, Rolando was taken aback when he caught Carjen in the car with another man. His reaction was a flash of anger. In that moment, he nearly destroyed everything inside the interior of the car. The picture of happiness crumbled in a matter of minutes. But then, Rolando agreed to give them a chance, choosing to forgive and continue to move forward with his beloved. In the eyes of others, they remained a model of an ideal couple, able to overcome all difficulties together. Rolando Aquino is an enigmatic figure who was born in 1987 in Bolivia. His exact date of arrival in Argentina remains unknown, like many other aspects of his life. As the eldest of 7 children in his family, Rolando learned from an early age the value of family bonds and hard work. His ideal was a happy family filled with joy and children's laughter. In his youth, he met Carolina Chavez, from whom he later had a son. Despite the difficulties, the couple remained on good terms. Later in his life appeared Soledad Guardio, who gave him another son, Elias. Relationships with Soledad also did not work out. However, Rolando was always a devoted father who took care of his children. He kept in touch and always maintained a warm relationship with the mothers of his children. From a young age, Rolando was a physically fit man who took care of his health by playing sports and playing soccer for the local team. Colleagues and loved ones described him as a kind and very hard-working man. Neighbors in his neighborhood got along well with him, but Rolando always showed a distinct shyness in socializing. Carjen was born March 30th, 1990, and spent her childhood and youth in Manato, in the same house where she and Rolando later established their warehouse. She was well known among the locals as an outgoing and open-minded woman. Like Rolando, Carjen dreamed of a happy and successful family with a caring and devotedly loving man. However, it took her some time to find the one man with whom she could build her happiness. Before meeting Rolando, Carjen had already attempted to create a happy relationship that resulted in the birth of two wonderful girls. One of her former partners, Raul Ojeda, became the father of one of them, and Carjen married him in 2013. However, as time went on, that marriage was on the verge of breaking up. According to Raul, financial difficulties were one of the reasons for the conflict. Worried about his life and in search of new opportunities, Raul decided to leave his family. On the pretext of buying some necessary item, he fled the city and traveled abroad, changing buses to make it difficult to track his whereabouts. In this way, he sought to evade all attempts to locate him. In the summer of 2019, 9-year-old Elias arrived at Rolando and Carjen's house. They had many plans for the near future that they wanted to spend together. However, on the morning of July 12, 2019, when Rolando came to wish his son a good morning before leaving for work, he noticed that the boy was not feeling well. The father immediately decided to take his son to the children's hospital to see a pediatrician. There, after examination, it became clear that Elias's condition is critical, and he was immediately sent to the intensive care unit. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, little Elias died shortly after he was brought to the hospital. The amazing thing was that he left home perfectly healthy, without any unusual symptoms, and arrived at his father's house also perfectly healthy. However, the medical report was devastating. It stated that Elias died of third-degree poisoning, which caused multi-organ failure and cerebral thrombosis. These conclusions left Elias's parents in complete bewilderment, as their son seemed to be completely healthy and active, and suddenly died of an incomprehensible disease. Following their professional duty, the doctors insisted on conducting an additional forensic medical examination. However, Elias's mother and grandmother, dumbfounded by the loss, refused this procedure. Carjen offered to cremate the boy's body, but Elias's mother also refused, preferring to bury her son in a private cemetery so that she could come and lay flowers on his grave. Elias's death was a blow that broke Rolando's heart. He was devastated by the unexpected loss of his youngest son. The caring and loving Carjen never left Rolando for a moment. She took care of all the business, carefully supported her boyfriend, and helped him through his pain and grief. Over time, with the warmth and support of the woman he loved, the pain began to subside. 16 months after this terrible tragedy, Rolando decided to take a big step and propose to Carjen. They got married, and the man was sure that this woman would always be by his side. However, their happiness turned out to be short-lived. On February 6, 2022, Carjen returned home after a beauty salon and working out at the gym, and noticed that Rolando began to experience serious health problems. The next day, February 7th, she found a medical ambulance outside their home. Rolando, 35, suddenly felt very ill. After vomiting profusely, he collapsed in the living room of their home, and the housekeeper called for emergency medical help. The doctors allowed Carjen to pass to her husband. When Rolando was taken to the Santa Maria clinic, his condition was critical. Despite the efforts of the medical staff, the young man passed away on February 9th. The cause of his death was severe poisoning. Given that Rolando was a healthy man who was active in sports, the medical staff began to ask questions of his wife. Carjen confirmed that Rolando was taking medication to remove dark spots on his skin. For specialists, this information was highly suspicious. Tests revealed a significant excess of calcium oxalate crystals in Rolando's system, which is a characteristic sign of poisoning by ethylene glycol, the main component of antifreeze for cars. The investigation into this strange and unexpected death of Rolando became a high priority for authorities. the prosecutor's office was actively investigating the neighborhood where the Aquino couple lived. Neighbors became important witnesses, reporting that Carjen had repeatedly given her husband some unknown medication. They were aware that she used these medications to go to a party without her husband. However, neighbors also expressed doubts about what happened to Rolando's son, which led investigators to think and consider the theory that Carjen may have only wanted to temporarily sedate her husband rather than take his life. However, the findings of the Technology Crimes Unit officers completely ruled out this hypothesis. Requests for various forensic examinations were sent, and Carjen, the wife of the deceased, was thoroughly questioned. Many contradictions arose during the interrogation. The investigating officers called on Carjen to name the substance she had slipped to her husband before his death. The woman claimed that it was just a skin blemish remedy and that she had administered it through an IV. However, when she was asked to provide a vial of the solution, Carjen said that the housekeeper had already thrown the drug away. A further interview was then conducted with the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, who denied Carjen's statement regarding the discarded vial. She also reported that she had overheard a conversation between the couple in which Rolando expressed dissatisfaction with the medication he was receiving. Carjen was detained during the investigation, and her cell phone was seized. Rolando's family, friends, and teammates were shocked by the news of his death. For visitors to the Aquino couple's warehouse and other locals, it was also a shock. No one could understand what had happened or why the father of the family had bid farewell to the world so suddenly. Raul, Carjen's ex-husband, was extremely surprised when rumors of a deliberate poisoning began to spread. He claimed that his ex-spouse was always affectionate and never violent towards him. After analyzing the suspect's phone, it was discovered that Carjen had searched a search engine for information on the deadliest poisons and how to clear her search history. In addition, records of her 2 ethylene glycol orders from an online store were found. The Agency for Toxic Substances, as well as the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, found that it is a synthetic substance that absorbs water and is used in the production of antifreeze. This product is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is extremely dangerous to humans. With the preliminary results of the forensic examination and all the information discovered, the prosecutor's office charged Carjen with willfully poisoning Rolando with a poisonous substance diluted with orange juice. Consumption of this beverage caused Rolando's health to seriously deteriorate, and he died. A series of strange and tragic events in the Aquino family forced the authorities to take drastic action. By mid-February, with enough evidence against Carjen, an aggravated murder charge was filed. In parallel, suspicions surfaced as to the cause of 9-year-old Elias's death, triggering a new investigation. The prosecutor's office decided to conduct a detailed investigation into the boy's medical history. The mother claimed that Elias was fully healthy and active, and that he had suddenly gone into a coma while at his father's house, from which he never came out. The boy's death certificate indicated that the cause was a malfunction of his internal systems and cerebral thrombosis. However, investigators persistently doubted that Elias, at age 9, could have died of such causes, especially given his overall health. The prosecutor's office requested information about possible purchases of ethylene glycol and received a response confirming that Carjen purchased the poison on July 2, 2019, shortly before the boy arrived at the Aquino home. Information from Elias's relatives also confirmed that Carjen insisted on cremating his body, but the birth mother rejected the idea and preferred to bury her son. The evidence gathered was enough for prosecutor Claudia Rios to file new aggravated murder charges against Carjen on March 4th, related to the poisoning of Elias. On March 14th, a judge ordered pre-trial detention for the woman, who tried to appeal, but the judge rejected it, affirming that she should remain behind bars until the trial began. That trial began 10 months later and was an important step in unraveling this complex and dark story. The long-awaited trial began in the Mendoza criminal court, attracting public immediate attention. November 28, 2022 was the beginning of the nationwide trial of Carjen Oviedo. 2 indictments were pending. The first, led by prosecutor Fernando Guzzo, concerned the murder of Elias, and the second, involving Claudia Rios, touched on the murder of Rolando. When the trial began, Rolando's eldest son, Javier Aquino, who was only 15 years old, appeared as a plaintiff, supported by counsel. Prosecutor Guzzo argued that Carjen killed first Elias, and then his father by giving them ethylene glycol mixed with orange juice. This led to the severe poisoning and death of the son and father. Carjen's defense representatives sought to refute the charges against her. They argued that Rolando was violent and abusive to their client, and that there was no credible evidence to support the allegations. The defense also stressed that Carjen had no motive for the murder. Why would she kill Elias? Obviously, little Elias could not have posed a threat. Carjen's attorney pointed out that the house, cars, and business belonged only to her. He also argued that her client had not made any purchases through her phone, and why would she have searched the internet for information about poisons when she had already used ethylene glycol to poison Elias, as the prosecutor claimed. The lawyer emphasized that while the actions that led to the deaths of the father and son are heinous, it does not give the right to indict a person until they are fully proven guilty. The defense attempted to sow doubt among the jury by arguing that the charges against Carjen were false, and Carjen claimed that the antifreeze purchase could have been made by her partner by hacking into her account. She also claimed she had an alibi for when her husband was poisoned. On February 6th, Carjen was not at home when he began having health problems. The defendant, known to the media as the Guaymalan poisoner, was given the opportunity to speak after the initial phase of the trial was over. Judge Diego Liberty allowed her to speak, and Carjen passionately argued that she was being accused of a horrific crime she did not commit. It was extremely painful for her to realize this, especially since she was the mother of 2 young daughters. The court hearing continued, and it was the turn of witness testimony that revealed new aspects of the case. The prosecution decided to address several questions to Carjen. Prosecutor Guzzo, focusing on key points, asked her if Carjen had suggested that her son Rolando be cremated. To this question, Carjen responded emphatically that the decision on this matter was not up to her, and she had never made any such suggestion. The prosecution called as witnesses relatives of the deceased to reveal further details of what had happened. Soledad, Elias's mother, told the court that after her son's death, Rolando relayed to her Carjen's words, in which she suggested that Elias's body be cremated so that both families could keep the boy's ashes. However, Soledad rejected the idea. She also shared her memories of meeting Rolando at the cemetery, where she was told about Carjen's jealousy. According to her, Carjen even slept in a separate bed, that the relationship between Rolando and Carjen was so tainted that the couple slept separately. Another witness was Carolina, the mother of Rolando's first child. She confirmed that according to her ex-husband, the couple slept separately, but Carolina herself had not had any interaction with Carjen prior to the incident. However, on the morning of February 8th, Carjen herself called her to inform her that Rolando was sick and in the hospital. Carjen told Carolina that her husband had probably taken some medication and was feeling ill. She also asked Carolina to help her unlock her husband's cell phone, claiming that she had suspicions that he was seeing another woman. Carolina was shocked to learn of Rolando's condition, as they had seen each other just a few days ago and he seemed perfectly healthy. She revealed that when she arrived at the hospital, Carjen was already there and had gone to see the doctors. Caroline wasn't allowed inside, so she was left waiting. Later, as she was leaving the hospital, Carjen told her that no one else was there and everyone had left. This made Caroline very suspicious, and she demanded an explanation from the doctors, to which the doctor announced that the patient had lost consciousness and was not responding to treatment. Caroline then went to the hospital secretary and complained. After talking to Carjen, Carolina learned that Rolando had taken medication for skin blemishes, after which he had had an allergic reaction. She claimed that the medication bottle no longer existed because the housekeeper had thrown it away. All these details added to the mystery of this complex case. The trial continued, and now doctors and experts stood before the jury to present forensic evidence and the results of a psychological examination. This evidence threw light on details that had gone unnoticed earlier. Dr. Ivana Marinelli, a pediatrician at the hospital, described how she cared for Elias in July 2019 when the boy was hospitalized. She described that Elias was brought to the medical facility with severe breathing difficulties and urgently required intubation. He also underwent a CT scan which revealed a deep cerebral thrombosis. Elias was given a course of intensive care. The doctor also confirmed that the symptoms that Elias had were consistent with ethylene glycol poisoning. This included impaired consciousness, restlessness, and a subsequent coma accompanied by a blood clotting disorder. Despite the best efforts of medical personnel, the boy's condition worsened, and after 5 p.m. on July 12, cardiac and respiratory arrest ensued. Doctors tried to resuscitate Elias for 50 minutes with the participation of his father, but all efforts were futile. He was pronounced dead at 6 p.m. The jury also read the results of Carjen's psychological examination, conducted at the request of the prosecution. In their findings, the experts emphasized that Carjen had lied and concealed the truth. She was presented as a person seeking to create an image of a decent person, but in reality she was characterized as cold and cruel. In their conclusions, the experts also noted that a psychological examination was conducted immediately after Carjen's husband's death, but did not reveal any emotional effects related to the loss of her spouse. This raised doubts about Carjen's sincerity and characterized her as a cold-blooded and self-focused woman. The examiners found evidence of latent hostility and impulsive behavioral reactions in Carjen. Finally, Prosecutor Guzzo expressed doubt that Carjen was a victim of gender-based violence as she portrayed herself in her testimony. All of this information described the true psychological profile of the defendant. The long weeks of tense waiting and continuous court hearings came to a close. The trial brought many people together in the courtroom, their eyes fixed tensely on the jury and the judge, awaiting the decision that would bring justice to this complex and tragic story. The prosecutor, in moving for a judgment of conviction against Carjen, assured the jury that all the evidence gathered strongly suggested that she was the one who planned and committed both murders. She purchased ethylene glycol in cold blood, disposed of the packaging, and disguised it as regular juice. Carjen watched her loved ones die without providing help in their moment of suffering. Prosecutor Claudia Rios, who is prosecuting Carjen's case for Rolando's murder, provided the court with an ethylene glycol purchase sheet paid from Carjen's bank account. The prosecution and the plaintiff insisted that the jury reach a unanimous verdict because that would be the only way to achieve justice in the case. They insisted that Carjen Oviedo be found guilty of murder with evidence of extreme cruelty. The defense, on the other hand, insisted that there was insufficient evidence to fully prove her client's guilt. The defense attorney argued that a person can be good or bad, but that it is not always related to the commission of a crime, and that for their client, the death of Rolando and his son was an incredible tragedy and a sad event. However, despite the arguments of the defense, Carjen Oviedo has put herself on the list of Argentine criminals who poisoned their victims. After a long silence and tense waiting for the verdict, the jury made their decision. They handed down a unanimous verdict. Carjen Oviedo was found guilty of killing Elias and committing the crime with particular cruelty. She was also found guilty of Rolando's aggravated death by insidious procedure. Carjen, standing in her black outfit with white beads around her neck, listened to the verdict without apparent emotion. The jury reached a guilty verdict. She was awarded a life sentence in prison. Carjen Oviedo, the woman in the dock, tried to escape punishment for the treacherous murders that shook society and left many unsolved questions. Her plans to cremate the bodies of the victims may have been her last attempt to escape the punishment she deserved. However, despite her tricks, the court and jury did not give in and rendered a just verdict. So why did Carjen Oviedo kill her loved ones? That remains a mystery. She had everything she needed to be happy. Perhaps the motive lies in the depths of her own soul, in jealousy, self-interest, pride. Carjen refused to admit her guilt, which is why the motives behind this horrific crime remain unclear. Carjen Oviedo will now face long years behind bars, pondering what dark forces may have so badly ruined her and those around her. Sadistic serial killer Michael Madison. 2 weeks shy of Halloween 1977, Michael Madison was born on October 15th in Cleveland, Ohio. His parents, Diane Madison and John Baldwin, accidentally got pregnant and didn't have much of a relationship at the time of his birth. John Baldwin left Diane to care for their young son and denied being Michael's father. Growing up, Diane's mother had been a sex worker and heroin addict. She grew up in a household full of neglect. Diane's upbringing left her unprepared to care for her young son independently. Shortly after giving birth to her son, Michael, social workers were brought into the home. Diane was allowing her constant stream of boyfriends to punish Michael. When Michael was 2, Diane was found to have forcefully stuffed food down Michael's throat. As a result, the toddler began vomiting uncontrollably. Unsure of what to do, Diane put her screaming son into a tub full of hot water. This caused Michael to cry more. Growing frustrated with her young son, Diane took him out of the bath and beat him with an extension cord. A year later, one of Diane's many boyfriends beat Michael so severely with a belt that the young boy vomited and needed to be hospitalized. In another horrific incident, Michael was beaten so severely by another one of Diane's boyfriends that he lost hearing in one of his ears. After years of abuse, Michael was sent to live with his grandmother, who was still a heroin addict and sex worker. But unfortunately, Michael's horrific childhood wouldn't change. Michael continued to be hospitalized for reasons such as dehydration. The social workers involved in Michael's case would note that he and his half-brother were covered in scratches and bruises. Before Michael reached high school, he had become a familiar face to law enforcement. On several occasions, the teenager had been found using lemon. In high school, he received a delinquent charge for inappropriately touching another classmate. The crimes Michael committed as a teenager were nothing like the ones he would go on to commit as an adult. In July 2013, the family of 38-year-old Angela Deskins reported her missing after they hadn't heard from her since June. Deskins was known for disappearing from time to time, so the family didn't think much of it. A month after she went missing, her body was discovered wrapped in electrical cords with a belt around her neck. 28-year-old Shadisha Sheely was reported missing in September 2012 when she didn't show up at her mother's house. Sheely, along with her 12-year-old daughter, were living with extended family at the time, and Sheely was supposed to stop by her mother's house to borrow some money, but she never showed. Her body was found in July 2013 inside a plastic garbage bag. After returning home from her job at an elementary school, 18-year-old Sherelda Terry disappeared. Her body was also found inside a black trash bag. On July 19, 2013, Michael's neighbors called the police to report a horrible smell coming from a garage near his second-floor apartment building. Inside the garage, the police discovered the decomposing body of a woman. During the police search of the surrounding area, including other vacant homes and backyards, the police found the bodies of 2 more women. Each was wrapped in plastic bags and located approximately 200 yards apart. The police were granted a search warrant for Michael's home, and inside they found further evidence of decomposition. Now the search was on to find where Michael Madison was. The police tracked him down to his mother's house. When they arrived, Michael refused to come out, resulting in a several-hour-long standoff between him and the police before he finally agreed to come out and was taken into police custody. Michael never once showed remorse to the victims' families during the trial. Michael laughed, smiled, and taunted the families. During Sherelda Terry's father's victim impact statement, Michael smiled at the distraught father. This set Terry's father off, and he tried to attack Michael but was quickly stopped. Michael didn't stop smiling once during the altercation. The jury deliberated less than a day before Michael Madison was found guilty of all 3 murders. He was also found guilty of 3 counts of kidnapping, 3 counts of gross abuse of a corpse, 1 count of rape, and 1 count of weapons possession by an ex-convict. On May 20th, 2016, Michael was sentenced to death. A sentence he would attempt to appeal a month later. On July 21, 2020, the Ohio Supreme Court voted unanimously to uphold the death sentence for Michael Madison. Killer Ronald O'Brien. Children are cautioned from an early age not to accept candy from strangers. While this golden rule is strictly enforced by vigilant parents throughout the year, on Halloween night, they throw caution to the wind and allow their little ones to go door to door asking for treats. In most instances, their request is granted without worry. Even so, once in a while, The monsters that lurk in the shadows take advantage of the occasion, resulting in dire consequences for the most innocent among us. In 1974, a boy in Pasadena, Texas fell victim to just such a predator when he became violently ill after indulging in a treat from his Halloween bag. Ever the concerned parent, his father had stayed by his side during the hour-long ordeal, offering comfort to the youngster as he convulsed on the bathroom floor. Only 8 years old at the time, Timothy O'Brien died later that night on his way to the hospital. In a shocking turn of events, an autopsy revealed that he had ingested enough potassium cyanide to kill 2 grown men. As difficult as it was to believe, all signs pointed to the fact that someone had deliberately laced candy with the colorless compound before randomly handing it out to unsuspecting children. Investigators were convinced that a cold-blooded killer was hiding somewhere in the suburbs of Houston, and they intended to find him. With no suspects in mind and little evidence to go on, detectives theorized that an unscrupulous person who was angry at the world in general had decided to take the life of a complete stranger, a child no less, as a way of getting back at society. To make a difficult situation even worse, there was no telling how many children had received the tainted sweets. Although authorities had put out an emergency news bulletin requesting that all Halloween candy be brought to the police station for inspection, they feared that there would be other victims before all was said and done. While they faced an uphill battle, to be sure, investigators did have a few things working in their favor. For one, it had been raining heavily on the evening of Trick or Treat, which had limited the number of houses that Timothy and his sister Elizabeth had visited. More importantly, a chemical analysis of the contents of the boys' treat bag had enabled them to pinpoint the carrier of the poison. Lab tests revealed that the killer's lethal weapon of choice had been the sweet and sour powder contained inside of a straw-shaped pixie sticks. After meeting with the residents of the houses where the O'Brien children were known to have gotten candy, detectives were confident that none of them had given up pixie sticks. However, during the course of their interviews, they learned that someone had been witnessed doling out that particular treat and that someone had been Timothy's father, Ronald O'Brien. When he was brought in for questioning, O'Brien claimed that a man he had never seen before had emerged from a darkened home and given him several pixie sticks to hand out on his behalf. He added that, after consuming a small amount of the sugary powder, Timothy had complained that it tasted funny. Instead of telling him to throw it out, he had given his son a soft drink to help wash it down. Under the pretense of helping police solve the case, he had readily provided them with the address of the house where the exchange had taken place. Upon speaking with the mystery man, who turned out to be an air traffic controller named Courtney Melvin, officers learned that he had an alibi for the night in question. According to him, he had been at work and had not returned home until well after midnight. When they visited his place of employment, his supervisor confirmed his story and had the paperwork to prove it. In a stunning show of support, 200 of Melvin's coworkers came forward to vouch for his character. Realizing that they had been duped, investigators quickly concluded that this man was not their killer, something that Ronald O'Brien had known all along. A bit of digging into his past uncovered that Ronald O'Brien, who had trained as an optician, was not nearly as respectable as he wanted others to believe. I'm not content who couldn't hold a job, he was drowning in a sea of debt. Not above taking what he wanted, he had been accused of stealing on numerous occasions, usually by former employers. While being shiftless and prone to theft doesn't necessarily mean that someone is capable of murder, the fact that O'Brien had taken out hefty life insurance policies, not one but 3, on his children in the months prior to his son's untimely death moved him to the top of the list of suspects. Another nail in O'Brien's self-constructed coffin came when it was discovered that he had phoned the insurance company on the morning after his son's death, inquiring about a payout. As the 8-year-old's body lay in the icy morgue, his father's only concern had been how quickly the money he had coming would change hands. On November 5, 1974, less than a week after Timothy was poisoned, Ronald O'Brien was taken into custody and formally charged with 1 count of murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. To no one's surprise, he pleaded not guilty across the board. He would steadfastly maintain his innocence throughout the trial, despite the damning evidence against him. During the proceedings, a parade of witnesses testified that O'Brien had become fixated on the properties of cyanide in the months leading up to his son's murder. His obsession led him to brazenly ask friends and family alike if they knew where he could purchase the deadly poison. He would also inquire of them if they had any idea how much of the substance it would take to kill a person. In June of 1975, 8 months after little Timothy O'Brien had been laid to rest, his father was convicted of his murder. He was also found guilty in the attempted poisonings of the other 4 children, none of whom had ingested the lethal powder. For his crimes, Ronald O'Brien, whom the press had dubbed the Candyman, was condemned to the electric chair. Down the road, as alternative methods of execution were introduced, his punishment was amended to a more humane death by lethal injection. It had taken the jury just over an hour to decide the fate of the man who had so callously plotted and carry out the murder of someone who had trusted him implicitly. Once the verdict was in, the waiting game began. As it happened, 9 years would pass, more time than Timothy had spent on this earth before his killer would face final justice. During his time on death row, O'Brien was reviled by his fellow inmates who, despite their own misdeeds, considered him to be lower than a snake's belly. Their hatred of the child killer ran so deep that they had thrown a party on the day of his demise to let him know that he would not be missed. After several stays of execution, O'Brien was put to death on March 31st, 1984, at the age of 39. When asked if he had any last words, he had taken the opportunity to rail against the system that had allowed him to come to such an end. When his death was announced over the loudspeaker, hundreds of people who had gathered outside the prison to celebrate the occasion had shouted trick or treat while throwing handfuls of candy in the air in remembrance of Timothy, a young boy who had paid the ultimate price for his father's greed. Todd Allen Reed, the Forest Park killer. The bodies of 3 women were found in the same stretch of parkland, all within a month of each other. It was not long before police had their man. But is he responsible for more than the 3 murders they convicted him for? 32-year-old Todd Allen Reed was already a registered sex offender when he strangled to death at least 3 women before dunking their naked bodies in Forest Park, a heavily wooded area just west of Portland, Oregon. From 1992 to 1995, he had served a measly 2.5 years of a 12-year sentence for the sexual assault of Shelley Harding, who was 7 months pregnant at the time of his cowardly attack. She had been walking home from work when he approached her and forced her into his car at knife point. Reed was involved to him and fled the scene of a minor crash with another vehicle on his way to the secluded spot where he sexually assaulted Shelley. After he had assaulted her, he attempted to strangle her with a seatbelt and began to cry. Shelley was strong and she was calm. She had been talking to Reed constantly, like he was a friend almost, building a rapport. Whilst doing so, she made sure to leave as much physical evidence as she could, touching every surface to leave as many of her prints as possible. Whatever this monster was going to do to her, she wasn't going to make it easy for him to get away with. When Reed broke down, she used this to her advantage, and her pleas to be let go and her promises that she would not tell anyone worked. Reed let her go. Not only did Shelley report her abduction and assault, the 2 men that had been in the car that Reed had crashed into also reported the hit and run. They even had his license plate. Reed pleaded no contest and was handed the 12-year sentence. He was registered as a sex offender and, crucially, his DNA was taken and stored in the state crime lab. This would be the golden ticket police needed to catch the Forest Park serial killer 7 years later. Reed was released early as he had built up sentence-reducing credits, half of which were for good behavior. At roughly 8 miles long and 5,100 acres, Forest Park is one of the largest urban forest reserves in the USA, ranked 19th to be more precise. It is not easy to wander from the 70 miles of trails due to the park's dense vegetation. To highlight just how secluded this park can get once you're off trail, in 2004, a 53-year-old man called Frank and his 12-year-old daughter Ruth were discovered to be living off-grid in the park. They had been there for 4 years, completely undetected. On May 7, 1999, a couple walking their dog on one of the park's more remote trails would come across the body of 28-year-old Wella Faye Mahler. She was naked and face down, entangled in thick blackberry brambles. She had been strangled, and it was determined that her body had been there for around 2 months. Police would find a used condom merely 28 feet from her body. They were able to extract DNA from this vital piece of evidence. The next day, May 8th, police themselves would discover a second body whilst they were searching the immediate area. The body of 26-year-old Stephanie Lynn Muscle was found around a quarter of a mile away from where Lila had been discovered. She too was found naked and had been strangled. Tests would determine she had been left there less than a week before she was found. They would also recover traces of DNA on her thighs. A group of hikers would find the third body, that of 18-year-old Alexandria Eisen, in the early evening of June 2nd. Alexandria had been reported missing sometime in May. Police were unable to reach her body until the next day. Due to the location, she'd been dumped down an extremely steep slope just off of a deer path. She was found naked and she too had been strangled. Her body was around 1/4 of a mile away from Lila and Stephanie's. After the discovery of Alexandria's body, Police Chief Charles Moves admitted that investigators had concluded they were looking for a serial killer due to the similarities of the crimes. Physically, all three women resembled each other, but they also had very similar life experiences. They were all homeless at the time of their deaths and had cocaine and heroin addictions, although Stephanie had just completed a detox program before her murder. Lila and Alexandria had been at some point engaged in prostitution to pay for these addictions. All three women were known to frequent West Burnside Street. It's also been claimed that Lila and Stephanie knew each other, although this has not been proven either way. It was determined that all three of the women had been murdered elsewhere and their bodies were taken to Forest Park afterwards. Toxicology all showed that they had taken heroin sometime before their deaths. The police response was immediate and it was impressive. A specialist task force consisting of 16 individuals was formed and they set about scouting bars, reaching out and offering protection to the community being targeted, and 30 additional beds were made available for homeless women during the investigation. Although residents were not happy about the lack of information they were receiving, the police kept their investigation tightly under wraps. Such was their determination to catch this killer. The task force would use the physical similarities of the three women to their advantage. A female officer of a similar appearance posed as a prostitute on West Burnside Street to see if they could reel the killer in. And sure enough, Reed took the bait. On the July 7th, the same day a vigil was being held for Lila, Stephanie, and Alexandria, Reed approached the undercover officer, and it was not long before his suspicious behavior flagged him to police. At about 5:20 a.m., he was approached by a member of the lookout team, Sergeant John Botchlet. Reed readily admitted that he was a sex offender and agreed to a search of his vehicle. They found an unused condom, a book entitled A Killing Gift, about a woman who can kill men by merely looking at them, and some yellow strapping. There was nothing incriminating to be found, and the police had to let him go. He was not off the hook, however, far from it. Another lookout that night, Detective Sergeant Dave Schlegel, recognized him from the 1992 sexual assault case. He had in fact been the arresting officer. Police began 24-hour surveillance of Reed, both at his home and at his place of work. At least once during this surveillance, he was observed driving in circles around West Burnside and Sandy Boulevard. The police swab results came back and confirmed that the DNA from the condom at the Moore crime scene and the DNA found on Stephanie's thighs matched the DNA that was on file for Todd Allen Reed. At around 7:30 p.m. on July 18th, after Reed had left for work, police executed a search warrant at his address, where he lived with his girlfriend. Once the police had left the premises, his girlfriend phoned him to let him know the police had been there. He attempted to make a getaway in the middle of his shift, but it was too late. The police had already arrived. At 11:30 p.m. on July 18th, 11 days after police had questioned him and only 1.5 months after the task force was set up, Reed was arrested outside of Ranella Produce, the warehouse where he worked night shifts, unloading the delivery trucks. On July 27th, he was indicted on 7 criminal counts in relation to 3 homicides. It emerged that Reed, who had been ordered to serve 8 years post-prison supervision and actually been kicked out of a sex offender treatment program 2 weeks before his arrest for failure to attend. On February 23, 2001, he pleaded guilty and received 3 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. Reed had been facing the death penalty, but his plea deal took this off of the table. Reed is also the prime suspect in 2, possibly 3, other murders in the Portland area. The cases being referred to by Rees are the 1987 cold case murders of 15-year-old Jennifer Lyncher and 12-year-old Mindy Colleen Thomas, and the 1999 disappearance of 19-year-old Alma Vecines. In regards to the murders, Gresham Police Sergeant David Lerwick has been quoted as saying, "Always suspect that he was the person who killed both those girls. We didn't have enough evidence to convict him." Jennifer had gone missing on July 3rd, 1987, and her skeletal remains was found on July 8th, 1988. Mingy went missing from the apartment complex where she lived on August 3rd, 1987, and her body was discovered on October 4th, 1988. Both of the children had been strangled and dumped in wooded areas on the eastern side of Gresham, about 3 miles apart, and they were both last seen in the company of Gail Bennett, Reed's then girlfriend and later wife. They married in 1988 and divorced in 1997. Gresham police said Bennett, who has a police record of her own, might have information about the killings but has been uncooperative. Bennett has denied any knowledge. At the time, police were operating under the assumption that they had both been killed by the same man, and that this man was known to them. They had questioned Reed at the time of the investigation due to the fact they had both been seen with Gail, but he was never charged or arrested. Police renewed efforts to solve the Gresham cases after his arrest in the Portland killings, but attempts to compare DNA from the old crimes with Reed's DNA have been inconclusive. Alma the witness seen on June 30th, 1999, and has not been seen since. She was working as a prostitute at the time of her disappearance, and it has been claimed she knew / was friends with Alexandria Eisen. No charges have been brought forward in her case, although it is impossible to downplay the likelihood they already had something to do with Ametha's disappearance. As of June 2020, what prison Reed is in is not known, and as of June 2021, he was no longer listed as an inmate and may be dead. The case of Sheila Labar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others, but sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book, Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Labar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Labar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Labar? Sheila Labar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father, the head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice, adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, LeBar, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just Strazoot filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners, both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill LeBar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon Labar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill Labar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. It got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch, Labar, constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman. who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire and talked about her untold wealth, inherited by her. In 2004, Labar met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael Delage. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael Delage disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and Labar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy Labar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks. But he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which he asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings. But that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made, a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny, Michael, and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court, who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Ennis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility.